functional? Yeah, hello. Volume! Hi, my name is Matt Hall, and after coming on after Jonathan Frid, hi. Wow. Isn't technology fun? Hi, my name is Matt Hall, and coming on after Jonathan Frid makes me feel a little like somebody coming on after Jimi Hendrix at Mahado. The reason I'm here is because my mother was Grayson Hall, and my father is and that's really nice of you, thank you. And they're good people, and I've been in touch with the people who organized this from the start, and they were kind enough to invite me because I hung out at the studio endlessly as a child, and they thought that might be interesting. And to that end, the one story that I love of what it was like in the Dark Shadows studio was that at one point, Vinny Lascalza was a makeup man, and he made me up. He had to be there for hours and hours as they taped and stuff, but he didn't have much to do. And one day I was just hanging out after school in the studio, and Vinny sat me down in the chair and made me up. It took like an hour and a half into this wolf creature with like long ears and a long nose and eyebrows, and he aged me, made my hands all weird. And then I got to wander around 9th Avenue terrorizing school children. It was so much fun, And that's kind of what Dark Shadows meant to me, because I was there endlessly, and it was a great deal of fun. But let's see, there are some decent stories. I sort of feel like everybody knows more about the show than I do, except that because you guys have all been studying it and know plot points and things like that. But you may not know the story of how my mother and my father both got onto Shadows. And the real, true, unhidden, unvarnished story is that Mom had some success as an actress. They had married in 1953, and as I like to say, they spent the 50s going places that had free hors d'oeuvres. And what is now called networking was once called social climbing, and they basically were attempting to have careers as an actress and a writer in Manhattan, in New York, and it's difficult to do. But so they had me in '58, and I'm an only kid, a child of only children, and then things began to break for them, and Dad got onto a show called Writer Day as writer. And Mom eventually got Night of the Iguana, her first film. Academy Award nomination, 1963. And I was down there for the shooting of that in Mexico. And I'll tell one story, which is that Richard Burton had such deep pits in his face from acne that they had to put putty in them for close-ups. But he was a really nice man. One time I met him. Anyway, so I was there for that, and then after Iguana, Mom did a Disney film and a few other things, and then hit a little bit of a bleak period in her career. And there was around 65, 66, there wasn't a heck of a lot of money coming in, and they had both rebelled from their parents. My mother and father both had rebelled from their parents. And they didn't relish the thought of going back into, the situations that they had rebelled from. My father was from an Ohio factory, small town Ohio factory town, farm factory town, and Mom was from Philadelphia, and they didn't relish the thought of returning to those worlds. But nonetheless, at some point, they had a kid to raise now, and they sincerely, like my father, went back to Ohio to check out whether or not it would be feasible for him emotionally to return to Ohio and give up all the dreams of being writers and actors and all that stuff. And while Dad was in Ohio looking at houses, my mother one day came home and I wasn't there, and she went to take a shower, and she put on the shower water, and she stuck one leg in the shower, and the phone rang, and she stood there on one foot, and she thought, do I answer the phone? Do I take the shower? She got out of the shower, and she answered the phone, and it was her agent saying, did she want to do the so-called Dark Shadows? And she said, hot damn, we don't have to move to Ohio. And that was the beginning of it. Dad got onto the show several months later. I think Mom got it in like May or June of '67, and Dad got it by the end of that summer. And the way it worked was there was a party that eventually ended up, as parties tended to do, at my parents' house. And Dan Curtis was there, and my father was being host to all of these actors, right? And he was just like being, Mr. Grayson Hall, and running around, like making sure their drinks were filled and that they weren't, spilling them on the carpet and things like that. And eventually, very late, Dan Curtis and he got into a long conversation in the kitchen. And Dan Curtis, by the end of the conversation, said, look, I want you to write for my show. And my father said, don't make me an offer. Dan was like, why? And my father was, don't say this. I mean, it's 1 in the morning. We're both, been drinking. This is not the time to talk business. And Dad said, okay, and called the next day and said, I don't say those things to people unless I mean them. Be at my office. So my father went in and got a job, which was like awfully nice for us, and meant that we really didn't have to go to Ohio and become factory workers. So anyway, what I would do is I would come home school would let out. By the way, I was really pleased to get the 3:30 to 4 spot because it holds a great deal of sentiment in my heart. But I would come home and if there was someone home, I would go to the studio. And I remember, the studio was like, I was really welcome there because the only other kid was David Hennessy. And in all honesty, I always, after a while, I liked David a lot. He was a little bit older than me, and he was a really nice guy. But in all honesty, I always felt slightly envious of David Hennessy because my mom was on this show, my father wrote this show, all of our friends came back afterwards from the show and hung out in our kitchen forever and ever and ever, right? And David Hennessy was on the show, and I was David Hennessy's age. And why couldn't I do that? And years later, I actually acted in high school, and my parents were gratified to find out that I could not act. That's why I couldn't do that. But I didn't know that at the time. I was just like, wait a minute, something's massively unfair here. So there are a couple of really nifty stories. I was just talking to Laura Parker in the other room, and there's a very funny story about her pug and my pug. See, the one thing that was weird about me growing up, most people here probably had 2 parents that were working, and it's kind of interesting to, you're sort of on your own a lot, but it's kind of interesting, when your mom is doing the soap opera. People would stop us on the street and ask for her autograph, and at first I was really, really bashful about that because it was it was like my life, my mother, that they were interrupting, and eventually one got used to it because, as the Shadows phenomenon rolled on, it became big. But I remember at one point, when I was still on the shy side of this, because I was a pretty bashful kid, somebody coming up to my mother on Fifth Avenue, and I was with her and saying, "Can I have your autograph?" And she signed something, and he said, "You're one of the most valuable autographs I have." And she said, "Oh, thank you." And that stuck in my 8-year-old, 9-year-old head. It was the most valuable autograph, right? And about 30 feet later, I turned to my mother and I said, "What's he going to do with it?" And she was like, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, he said it was valuable." And Mom thought about it and said, "That 30 cents will get him on the subway." But that's not the story with pugs. Eventually, the fans, I mean, you know, fans were always neat. But, and I got to the point where I really liked it, but at first I was like, this was very big, new, unknown territory. But anyway, the story with the pugs is that we had this small dog named Thing. If any of you remember, like, the mom always mentioned Thing in interviews and stuff at the time. And Thing was a nice pug. There's now a movie, Milo and somebody has a pug in it. I haven't seen it. But Thing was a pug. Pugs are kind of, you know, ugly little runts. They're sweet animals. They're like you know, weird bulldogs. Anyway, Thing was a virgin. Aww. And Thing, this man has a picture of my childhood dog. All right. Can I see? Thing. Thank you. Oh, that's your picture. This is him. Thing, boy, he was ugly. I named him Thing. Whoops, sorry. Thank you. I named him Thing from the Dr. Seuss books. He brings Thing 1 and Thing 2, and I was 4 years old when I got him, and he was Thing 4. Anyway, Thing was virgin. Thing was a small New York apartment dog. He had much experience of members of the opposite sex. And it came time, we decided at some point to mate him because we wanted smaller things. And Laura Parker had a pug named Rosie. Okay. So the Dark Shadows being cast the way it was. Rosie was brought to our house for an extended visit. You know, and we were going, you know, maybe something would happen, you know, sparks would happen, you know, we'd get little things. And so Rosie gets there. Thing does not understand. Thing is slow. Thing doesn't get it. Maybe Rosie hadn't quite gotten into heat yet, but Thing was not really there for it. And he didn't really wasn't terribly curious about her until one day my mother was walking them both, like the second or third day that he was there, and she was in front of the New York Hilton Hotel, right, with these two small pugs, and she's standing at the New York Hilton Hotel, and this bus pulls up, right, and starts to unload passengers, and it's a cheerleading convention, right, and two of the cheerleaders see my mother and recognize her and come over. And then Mom watches, and she's, you know, doing the whole Dark Shadows thing with these two cheerleaders, and this, like, all of these other cheerleaders are coming out of the bus, and they're all beginning to riff on the fact that my mother is my mother, standing there with two pugs, and at that moment, Thing mounts Rosie. And my mother looks at this. And my mother is talking to these two very sweet little cheerleaders who are asking for her autograph. And my mother remembers that when pugs make love, it takes 45 minutes. And the last thing my mother wants to do is stand in front of the New York Hilton with two dogs engaged in coitus for 45 minutes while cheerleading conventions ask her for her autograph. So she rips the dogs apart and runs back to the apartment and slams in the elevator and gets them upstairs and locks them, and comes in and takes the leads off, and they both sit down. The Thing remained a virgin. And it's really important. It shows you what trauma at the wrong moments can do. You know, that's my dog was a virgin. Didn't have puppies because of Dark Shadows. But anyway. There are. Dad wrote it, and Dad basically I could come home. I had my choice. You see, I could come home and I could go to the studio and hang out there and watch television and you know, because they had TV monitors everywhere, and hang out on the set, which a lot of you went to Red Zone last night. How many guys went to Red Zone? That's what it was. I mean, it's more or less the same as it was, as I'm sure somebody said. You know, the sound level was less. But anyway, what story was that? I have no idea. Oh, I have my choice. I could come back from school and like hang out at the studio, or I could go home where Gordon Russell and Ron Sprode and my father were sprawled all over the living room, right? And basically, how Dark Shadows was written. Dark Shadows was written virtually in my father's living room, other places as well, and also Dan Curtis's office at 555 Madison Avenue. There. I was so glad to remember that. Basically, I would come home, and Gordon would be on the couch, and my father would be lying on his back, pulling his eyebrows, saying things like, "Well, what if she's a witch?" You know, and very often, as the thing rolled on, we would sit around the dining room table over dinner and kick around plots, and I would try to give ideas to them, which they thought were very sweet and never used. You know. But Dan Curtis is a real mensch. Dan is a strong man in many ways. And Dan had a rule that there were only 21, you were only allowed to use 21 people a week on the show, which it may not have been, I'm not sure the full extent of that rule, but that was definitely there for a period. And at one point, Dan got enraged because my father and Gordon Russell and Ron Sprode had used more than 21 people, and it was Thursday. So he was, and this happened a couple of times, Dan made them do a show with only 2 people. He would have made them do a show with only 1 person if he could, but but he made a show. So there are a couple of shows. There's one with my mother and Joan Bennett, and it's just the 2 of them, and they both just chew the scenery, you know. Anyway, and it was a pretty nice way to grow up. I would go to the studio and skip. I would go to the control room, and the control room was always like this mysterious little area, and it was fascinating. And it was like it was like the inside of the main room of a nuclear plant, or where they can pull a space shuttle. It was just more technology than you've ever seen. And they got so sick of me hanging out watching them produce the show in the control room that they gave me my own machine to play with. They gave me this. Gave me this huge, tall bank of monitors with buttons I could push and stuff, and it meant nothing. I mean, it was extraneous to the show. I wasn't doing anything to the actual air or tape show, but it was just this wall of equipment that they could just Matt, go over there, and I could hang out and press buttons and cause nothing to happen, but I felt important, and it was kind of how they dealt with children encroaching on their territory, and but anyway, I've written a book called Nightmare Logic, which is a thriller. Bad things happen to nice people, nice things happen to bad people, and then it all gets reversed. And it doesn't have, it's a horror book, at least so they say. I always thought it was a tender love story, but it turned out I was wrong. But the one nice thing that is true of the book is that the first scene is really creepy. Okay, the first scene of the book is a 9-year-old girl killing her stepmother with a pet scorpion. Right? And various people have asked me where I came up with that. And there's a funny story which I didn't realize until years after I wrote it, where in fact I came up with that. And where I came up with that is when my mother did Die de Iguana in Mexico, I was there, and I was a kid, and there are the kind of scorpion in Arizona that my murderess does her bit with is Centroid sculpturatus, but in Mexico there's a different one, which if a child gets bitten by it or stung by it, can kill a child. It won't kill an adult, but it will kill a child. And I was a child. Mom was nothing if not overprotective, so she had in her purse at all times this kit, which was like this World War I medical kit with a glass hypodermic needle and scorpion antivenom, right? And she never had occasion to use it, but she had it in her purse at all times. I never got bitten, nobody ever got bitten, we still had it. And she came back to New York with it, and it sat in the medicine chest of our apartment in New York all of my life, and it's undoubtedly there even as we speak. And we never throw out anything, you know. And finally, my editor at Bantam asked me how I come up with the scorpion scene, and at that moment I realized it, which is that I'd written this horrible thing that happens in this house, and it could never have happened in my house because we had scorpion antivenom. We were prepared. You know? Just, I urge all of you to go out and purchase some just in case. But, well, that's you know, my memories of shadows are complex, intriguing, and vague. But if there are any questions, I'd love to take some. There's a man there with his hand up. Well, shadows. I've actually worked with my father. I've worked with him on One Life to Live, and so I've seen soap opera. And Shadows was done. I think. Okay, Shadows was done in like endless, virtually all-night sessions in Dan Curtis's office. You know, Dan Curtis hated it when people went to sleep. And oh my God, it's fast. Yeah, my father in the last two. Well, actually, the deal more or less got done earlier this week. I would say he called me Tuesday. This has been in negotiation for a couple of weeks. That's about it. My father, as of tomorrow, we're going to be. He's going to be co-head writer. He's not head writer of Santa Barbara. So, you know, that's kind of neat. I told him it was sort of like the Lone Ranger, you know, being called back to put on his mask. You know, it's like because it was very sweet of the network types to say we need this man. You know, but yes.
Yeah, I have two questions about your novel. First
Okay.
of all, before I started reading Nightmare Logic, I had gotten the impression that Carolyn was the protagonist, but you always spoke about her in the prologue, and then for the rest of the novel, Ben was the protagonist, and Carolyn...
It's Ben's book. Yeah.
Why was that? Why was
Because it's Ben's story. Ben is the character that this is a question relating to my novel, Nightmare Logic. Ben is the character who must go from point A to point B. He goes from being a passive observer of his own life to being an active participant. And it's Ben's story. You know, that's what I wanted him to do. Was I wanted to create with Carolyn and with the other characters a situation where somebody went from being a reporter, an observer, an unbiased non-participant of the events around him, to somebody who actually did create a change. And thus it is Ben's story. Carolyn is a nifty character and she's fun to watch, but it's Ben is our hero. But because my sympathies in that book are with Nita, and as a result of that, the second book will have a female protagonist. It's called Book 2 at this moment. It doesn't have a title. Shoot.
First, I felt something vague towards the end of the novel. I was a little confused. How was Nita able to figure out that Carolyn was the murderer? Why would she put her life in danger by going to her house? And how was Ben able to figure out that Nita knew that Carolyn was the murderer and that she was...
Ben goes to New York. This has nothing to do with Dark Shadows. This is a long... I almost don't want to answer a couple of those questions solely because other people here haven't read it, and we'll have given away the ending, and that won't be any fun. But well, we can. What? Well, each person can interpret it their own way. I think we can talk about this at some other time, only because all these, you're asking me to tell the end of my novel. I wouldn't do that to you. But, perhaps later in this thing. Yes?
Did your mother ever save any props from the TV series on Shadows? Props?
We had some stuff lying around the house. I'm not sure what though. She may not have. I know that there was. I at one point as a child made a coffin in shop class because, and everybody else made bowls. You know, the teacher was really into us making bowls. You know, but I had dark shadows in my background, so I made this coffin, which is really nice, and that's still around. But I don't know. I think a couple of her wigs and stuff might still be somewhere, but I don't really know where. Mom died in 1985 I don't know how many of you are aware of that, of lung cancer. And it was a mercifully short illness, and it was really drag because she was working when we found out that she was sick, and she was in a play, actively working, and it was a very rough period for my father. And so I know that anybody who's been through that has been through that. It's really nasty. But no. Oh yeah. Hi.
Hi. Do you have any recollections of the movies going out to Lyndhurst? Maybe?
Yeah, I remember endless. I mean, the thing that happens with movies. Somebody once said of movies that basically your first day on a movie set is the most interesting day of your life, and every day thereafter is the most boring. And that's true. I remember being at Lyndhurst for the shoots, Lyndhurst is where they filmed the Dark Shadows films, and I remember just playing endless games of gin rummy with people. And also I remember those were furnished homes, and they were beautiful, beautiful, homes. And I remember first learning some dumb stuff about furniture. One of which is that there's furniture in that movie that has faces on it, and the eyes are crossed in the faces that are carved in marquetry on this furniture. And somebody explained to me that you didn't ever want to have eyes looking at you, so that they always, at a certain period, furniture crossed them. And that's the kind of thing that fascinated me when I was a kid. Like all the stuff that happened with Shadows. I got paid to cue my mother 50 cents every time, because there was one writer who shall be nameless, but who isn't Gordon or Ron or any of the people I've mentioned, who my father hated to cue my mother on his scripts because he just didn't really like this one writer. It was very early on, as a result of that, I would get paid for that. I also got I got paid 50 cents to what is it called? Collate my father's scripts. We had stacks of scripts lying around. Actually, we did have some Dark Shadows stuff. We had stacks of scripts lying around, and then in a burst of something, we threw them all away. And I was really ashamed of that. I came back from wherever I was, and I opened the drawer where all the Shadow scripts were, and it's like, wait a minute, there's nothing here. That was frightening. Yes?
I don't know if you can remember. Were there any plot lines which your father didn't use on the show but had considered? I mean,
the deal with soap opera is that, having worked on one, I know this, the deal with soap opera is that whatever's around you, use. I think there were some ideas that probably were not done. I don't remember, unfortunately. He basically combed through lots and lots of sources for the stuff that was in Shadows, and all those books were lying around the apartment for years. Some of the Hans Holzer material, lots of stuff like that. There's one more question. How about you?
Do you have any good stories about what it's like to publish your first time novel?
It's really nice. I'm shocked at this. I mean, the book Nightmare Logic, the book I wrote, is sort of, it was a sword and a stone in my life that every day I tugged at a little more. It took me a long time to write. I started in college and kept working on it. And when the Bantam is put out 175,000 copies, mass market, paperback, and then before publication, put out 15,000 more, so we've got 190,000 copies out there. The first day that it was published, I grabbed a friend of mine, which was just the summer, I grabbed a friend of mine and ran from bookstore to bookstore, staring like an idiot and pointing and giggling, which is an experience I recommend to everyone that they should do it. The whole process of publishing has been very gentle and television is a lot more stressful, you know, because I've always said that there's more money in television, having worked in them both. My deal with One Life to Live is that as long as, I figure, as long as I can keep writing novels that sell, then I won't have to do soap opera again. You know? And the reason I say that is because when One Life to Live was good, it was the best job I ever had in my life. It was like having an entire town to work with. And when it was bad, it was like working in Beirut under fire. You know, because you've never had a Saturday like you've had where you're sitting there with some terrible network executive and you realize after 4 hours of an 8-hour meeting that they haven't read the material and they're faking it. That's chilling, ladies and gentlemen. That's why I want to, you know, that's why books are fun. But anyway, I'm being interrupted. I hope that this has been in some way helpful for you.
Thank you, Matthew Hall, author of Nightmare Logic.